After more than 2 years of suffering through COVID-19, pandemic, brutal lockdowns, riots, shortages, and exploding murder hornets, the American economy is now collapsing under a plummeting stock market and the worst inflation we've seen in decades. The average price of gasoline has shot past $5 a gallon, making it harder for workers to just make it to their jobs, not to mention the increased cost of shipping essential goods to where they are most needed. It's tempting to view this string of calamities, as some politicians insist that we do, as just bad luck.
With all of the constraints that COVID has placed, look, we have the war in Iraq, we have COVID.
Or to shift blame away from home, to distant foreign leaders.
And now, second big reason for inflation is Vladimir Putin. Gas prices, not a joke.
And while there is some truth to the idea that Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has had an effect on fuel prices, it's far from the only cause. To claim otherwise would be to ignore the trend of rising prices that started well before the Russian invasion, as well as everything we know about the history of American economic downturns. Our current economic woes are not a coincidence, nor are they purely the result of foreign malice. Rather, they are predictable outcomes of our own domestic policies over the last few years. It's a pattern that we keep repeating and never seem to learn the error of our ways. To understand this, we first need to ask a couple questions. What causes inflation? And what leads to recessions? Fortunately, the answer to both is the same. Recessions happen when a large number of investments across the entire country fail at the same time. This doesn't happen by chance. It requires a systemic failure. A natural disaster, or even a pandemic could explain it. So could forcibly preventing millions of workers from producing anything for over a year. But in most cases, recessions are not caused by acts of God, but by monetary policies that encourage bad behavior on a society-wide scale. We saw this in the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008. Banks were encouraged to extend risky loans to people who couldn't afford them. When the wave of defaults predictably came, it sent the entire housing market into a tailspin, from which it took years to rebound. But by far the most common culprit of causing recessions is the central bank, the United States Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is responsible for controlling the country's money supply, which in turn determines the general interest rates for borrowing or lending. When there are lots of dollars available, interest rates are low. When there are fewer dollars, interest rates increase. This matters because interest rates serve a useful function in financial markets, signaling to the investors when it's a good idea to borrow and when they should be more thrifty with their money. In a free market, low interest rates occur when people have lots of money to save in their bank accounts, money that they will someday want to spend. Investors respond to the low interest rates, take out loans, and invest in new businesses, factories, or technologies, confident that consumers have the money to buy their own products in the future. On the other hand, when interest rates are high, it means that there are consumers that have less money to spend and save, so producers scale back their activities until more prosperous times come. The system works pretty well. Of course, some people will make mistakes and make bad investments, but that's unlikely to happen across the entire economy at the same time. That is, of course, until the Federal Reserve gets involved. When the Fed increases the money supply, it artificially reduces interest rates. This sends the wrong signal to investors, leading them to believe there is more appetite for new production than there actually is. They take out loans and build new factories, only to find that a few months later or years later that the demand simply doesn't exist to justify the expense. Their investments, in other words, don't pay off. They lose money and have to fire workers. When this happens to thousands of companies at the same time, you get a recession. At the same time, the increase in money supply drives prices up, the process known as inflation. The simple reason for this is that creating more dollars without a corresponding increase in goods and services makes each bill worth a little less. Under the Jimmy Carter administration in the 1970s, mainstream economists were baffled at the simultaneous increase in inflation and unemployment. They called it stagflation, a phenomenon that was supposed to be impossible under the popular economic theories of the time. Of course, stagflation is exactly what we would expect to see when the money supply is increased and interest rates artificially lowered. In fact, it's exactly what we're seeing today. So if printing more money creates inflation and drives people out of work, why does the government keep doing it? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, spending money is popular. In both 2020 and 2021, the government cut stimulus checks for Americans negatively impacted by lockdown policies, in addition to spending countless billions on other projects only tangentially related to fighting the pandemic. Spending gives the appearance of doing something, which is better than the appearance of doing nothing, especially in times of crisis. Of course, that money has to come from somewhere, and since you can't realistically raise taxes on people already suffering an economic meltdown, they simply create it out of thin air. The second reason why the Fed keeps printing when they know it does harm is that it sort of works temporarily. By flooding the economy with cash, a market collapse can be delayed. Prices take time to adjust, and bad investments take time to mature. In the meantime, the extra dollars give the appearance of prosperity. This tactic cannot be sustained, though, and in the end, it only makes recessions longer and deeper, like a drunk putting off the inevitable hangover with more booze. Before the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1917, recessions were rare and short-lived. The market is surprisingly good at correcting itself, even in cases of severe economic turmoil. A little discussed panic in 1920 started off almost as badly as the Great Depression itself, but the government cut spending and reduced the money supply instead of expanding it. The result was that the economy bounced back in just over a year. But from 1921 to 1929, the American money supply almost doubled, setting up a depression that would last over a decade. Presidents Hoover and Roosevelt both embarked on programs of reckless spending in the name of helping workers, along with draconian controls on prices, wages, and private property rights. All of this prevented the economy from correcting itself and needlessly prolonged the Depression. There's a popular myth that military spending during the Second World War ended the Great Depression. In fact, it was not the war, but the end of the war that ended the Great Depression. Soldiers came home to resume productive work. Factories started producing useful goods again instead of bullets and bombs. Government spending went down, and a great many wartime regulations were rolled back. Fighting wars may not be good for the economy, but ending them certainly is. Today, in 2022, we can see all the same warning signs that were present in every major recession in the last century. The Trump and Biden administrations prevented people from working and producing, while at the same time pumping more and more dollars into the economy. And when things get worse, instead of reversing course, they double down, making the same mistakes again and again while attempting to deflect the blame onto others. It doesn't take a genius to see that reckless spending and endless money printing can only make things worse. The only hope politicians have is that we remain so paralyzed with fear that we fall into the oldest trick in the book, believing that the appearance of doing something is better than the appearance of doing nothing, even when doing something is actually making us a little poorer every single day.